Thank you very much. I'm happy to be back again. I was at the last meeting in Las Vegas and several meetings before that as well, years ago. But I'll be talking today about the Great Reset. And last year, I gave the basic overview from the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, penetrate the cabinets, all the way down. But I'm going to give an updated presentation today, more focused on what they're actually doing. And I'll get to that in a minute, but basically it's the collapse of energy, agriculture, transportation, free speech, and even our financial system, and our medical system, our hospitalization, our medical care, which I'll talk extensively about today. So I'm taking what I did last year, which was the overview, and I'm advancing it to how it's real. Climate lockdowns, which I talked about how they wanted to do it, they're actually being implemented, and they're actually banning flights now in France to save the planet. They're banning gas-powered cars, all doing it almost exactly the way they did it with COVID, without a vote of any democracy, parliament, legislator. It's being done through emergency decrees, through executive order, through court orders, and through bypassing democracy through corporate government collusion. So that's my talk today. Marc Morano, for those of you who don't know, I have the website Climate Depot. That's me debating Bill Nye. That's me on Jesse Waters just a couple weeks ago talking about the Canadian smoke fire. So I thought I'd bring a cigar. That's not a real cigar. It's a vape cigar, but everyone thought it was real because it had all the smoke production and vapor. But we were talking about the health impact of the Canadian smoke, and I was saying it's Justin Trudeau once again copying China, sending crappy air quality around the world. And of course, China's got some of the worst air quality. So that's my book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. And that's the other book, Green Fraud, about energy, and the other book, that's sort of your coffee table book on climate, Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. So over the years, the science is always changing. I've learned in the debate of climate change, we no longer look today at the metrics that Al Gore's film did in 2006. Al Gore looks quaint by comparison. He talked about polar bears, CO2, sea levels. We don't look at things like that anymore. Now we look at airline turbulence, rape statistics, crime, vehicle theft, train derailments, police shootings, toxic masculinity, white supremacy, as NASA's now blaming global warming on, car accidents, as our Department of Transportation is looking into climate change causing car accidents. But the science sure does change. This is back during the Spanish influenza. Newspaper article, nicotine versus influenza. Just shows you how the medical consensus can change. Smoking cigars keeps viruses away. Dr. Harry William Rees, the mouth and throat of a smoker is freer from bacteria than those of a man who never uses the weed. So this is how the science changes. Again, same article. Convinced that his influenza bugs have as pronounced aversion for tobacco as that of the maiden ladies, Dr. Rice of the Central Emergency Hospital staff has laid aside his gas mask and now smokes black cigars continuously while prescribing for flu patients. I gotta tell you, as wacky as this sounds, if we had gone this direction during COVID, as opposed to authoritarian lockdowns and vax and masks, I think the smoking cigar route would have been much better public health policy. Follow the smoky science. Dr. Rees said, the juice from the cigar butt has considerable antiseptic powers. Well, the smoke, through slightly irritating to the throat membranes, has a deterrent action that any bacteria may be seeking to gain a foothold. He smoked 7 to 8 black cigars a day while prescribing. Now, this is an article in 1919, San Francisco newspaper. Someone did a search. This guy lived until like the late 1960s, so he actually, was around for a while. In Popular Science, May 1919, they had the mask mandates back then. That's an actual device someone came up. And of course, George Lopez, the comedian, did that in 2020 with his surgical mask, smoking a cigar through it. But this is just the wacky world of public health. And of course, they had the mask slackers, is what they were called then, the people who refused to wear masks. It wasn't a big mask mandate. And what's funny is the Washington Post did a whole article right when COVID was hitting, saying that mask mandates did not work during the Spanish flu. And I'm sure that was later flagged as misinformation. But is today's science really advanced? Does it make sense to smoke 5 or 6 black cigars to avoid a virus? Look at the mayor of LA, that's with Magic Johnson, defying COVID rules asked for a photograph, he holds his breath. This was when LA had massive mask mandates, and he decided he was just going to hold his breath and not wear a mask. That's as scientific as smoking a cigar to avoid it. Now, of course, the New York Times admits the mask mandates did nothing. How did this get past the misinformation? And the Washington Post is, everyone's admitting that now. They're admitting the lockdowns didn't work. Slowly and surely, however, they haven't changed anything, which I'll get to a little later on. When it comes to energy, just so you understand I'm not going to go into solar, wind, and a lot of energy today, but to save the climate, we need to give up demand for constant electricity. This is an article from 2018 from Rutgers University. It's amazing how an idea is born in academia and then it becomes reality. In the UK power chief, the era of constant electricity is ending. Families have to get used to power only when it's available. This is known as a PSYOP, the same way during COVID lockdowns, you could only go to the store when government deemed it was acceptable. By the way, Deborah Birx, Trump's COVID coordinator, did an interview in summer of 2020 saying the United States should have followed what Italy did during the COVID lockdowns. And Italy and she laid this out, Italy had a restrictive policy where you could only leave your house 1 hour a week in Lombardy, Italy. To go to the grocery store, you needed a permit from the government. It was monitored and timed. This would have been our future. This is how insane public health has become. And this is how insane our power grid has become. They're telling us now we can't get used to power when it's available. Former Obama Treasury Secretary Marc said the quiet part out loud. We don't want lower prices for fossil fuel. We prefer higher to achieve climate goals. They're not looking to do a transition. By the way, it's easier to transition your gender than it is your energy, by the way they're going about this. We have true and serious energy dysphoria right now. We should maybe have fossil fuels identify as solar and wind, and they would leave it alone through regulations. But here it is, the Great Reset, collapse of energy, food, transportation, property ownership, financial system. You will be deprived of cheap energy. You will eat fake meat and bugs, including lab-grown meat, which I'll get to later. You'll go nowhere and be happy. You'll say nothing and be happy as they restrict your rights. And you'll, of course, own nothing, your ability to own a home. They're talking about ending private car ownership. Multiple avenues have talked about that. So this is chaos. This is the Christian Science Monitor, Vladimir Lenin during Tsarist Russia, Bolshevik Revolution, had the phrase, worse is better or the worse the better. In other words, the more chaos you can impose on a society, think of March 2020, the better it is to impose your radical vision upon society. You soften up the public. Well, Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway funds Bill Gates Foundation, and they fund this domestic chaos that they're looking for. The Gates Foundation bankrolls the teaching of critical race theory, including math is racist, men can have babies, etc. Gates Foundation offers gender identity toolbox. Peter Flaherty of the National Legal Policy Center went to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting and gave this speech. He was arrested, fingerprinted, thrown in jail with the blessing of Warren Buffett standing on video stream on the podium. But the point here is they are trying to distract us. This is the chaos. They're getting us to fight among ourselves about race, about gender, these kind of ideologies. Well, the big theft is occurring on the backside, the intentional collapse of everything we've known and loved pre-March 2020 and Great Reset. Warren Buffett has donated tens of billions of dollars to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The company, Bill Gates said this, the company bears their name, but half the resources come from Warren Buffett. So this is two billionaires who've hijacked the media, academia, government, and our culture, getting us to fight among ourselves. In 1930, this is 1932 book, and also this is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's kitchen cabinet advisor, socialist economist, who wrote a book called The New Deal, and then a later book, another book called The Road We Are Traveling. But he envisioned an early version of the Great Reset, and this is what they're doing now. Control of banking, credit, security by the government, control of energy, hydroelectric power, petroleum, natural gas, control, these are all his words, control of transportation, railway, highway, airway, waterway, control of agricultural production, state control of communication and propaganda. In 1930s, this was written. This is what they're achieving today. Now, it took 90 years, okay, but still, they're persistent. And look at the last chilling line. Why should the Soviets have all the fun remaking the world? This was during the Walter Duranty a period when the New York Times columnists went over there and praised Stalin's agricultural reforms and the whole communist envision. And so they were caught up, of course, in the Roosevelt administration. Today it would be, why should China have all the fun? And that's what I talked about last year. So the science that we have today, that's actual kids. I believe that's in Seattle, Washington area, in the green bubbles. That's another one. See all the teachers in the middle? They're all standing up. None of them have masks on because they were vaccinated. The kids didn't have the vaccine available, COVID. They had to wear masks. And then, of course, that sixth story, that's from the LA paper. Children apologize to their dying elders for spreading COVID-19. This was an article in LA where they had kids tearfully apologizing for being kids, for getting COVID and allegedly giving it to their parents or grandparents, and the media was saying they were killing them. They've weaponized human interaction with COVID. We all know that the lockdowns didn't work. Updated now, even major studies and everyone just acknowledging that. Just to let you know how they play with words. You're an anti-vaxxer, you could have every single COVID booster, every vaccine ever invented, and keep up to date following Anthony Fauci, but you're still an anti-vaxxer if you don't support vaccine mandates. Look at the first definition. This was redefined, Merriam-Webster, a person who opposes the use of vaccines or regulations mandating vaccinations. So if you oppose vaccine mandates, you too are an anti-vaxxer. Central bank, and of course vaccines were used for access to everything. So the central bank digital currency, Joe Biden last year did a central bank digital currency executive order. The Bank of England was very clear about what it tells you. Your spending will be restricted to what, quote, the government deems to be sensible. They're being very open about this. You want to buy meat, gas, or some kind of, or run up your electric bill or air conditioning, that's not going to be sensible. And a declared climate emergency. How do we know what they were trying to do? Comply or else. We've seen central bank digital currency in action in Canada with the truckers. He didn't threaten, he froze the truckers' bank accounts. He called up and he declared the Emergencies Act in Canada, first time ever used, declared them domestic terrorists, called up the banking industry, called up the insurance industry, and they fell all over themselves. Corporate government collusion. They didn't shut off access to their pension or government services. They shut off access, the banks, to these people's own money in their own accounts because Justin Trudeau said they were terrorists. That is the future of central bank digital currency. Climate lockdowns, and the same thing with central bank digital currency. The CO2 monitoring cards are enabling the tracking of your carbon footprint on every purchase. This is the MasterCard United Nations Joint Forces. It monitors and cuts off your spending when you hit your carbon max. It's voluntary right now. Don't worry, it's voluntary. Wasn't the income tax voluntary when they started that? Okay, I get rid of the video. This is ESG, Environment, Social Governance. Vivek Ramaswamy is basically running his presidential campaign on that. You see Elon Musk. This is where essentially you're bypassing democracy at stakeholder capitalism. The whole idea of anything you've learned about business out the window. You're no longer evaluated on your product, your services, consumer satisfaction, return on investment. You're now monitored on whether you adhere to critical race, gender ideology, the climate agenda. And I think this is great. This was a consumer research organization. What does ESG stand for? Enabling slave labor and genocide. They'll never apply this to China. And elitist, socialists, and grifters. That's, I think, my favorite definition of ESG. But if you actually want to know, I don't know how many people have seen this video. This is from the Cultural War Room. And I think it's the greatest 1-minute video of how to explain what ESG, environment, social governance is. Let's watch this, 1 minute long.
Hey, I'm Brian. My pronouns are he, his, him. I understand you're looking for a small business loan, but you're having troubles with your ESG score.
I was denied.
What's your business?
I operate drilling equipment, oil and gas.
Uh-huh. The E in ESG is for environmental. You're in a dirty industry.
So I can't get no loan?
Well, let's take a look at your company's social policies. Tell me about your plan to create social justice.
Social justice.
Do your employees get paid time off for abortions? And tell me about your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan.
Well, I ain't got none of that. I'm a driller. I just hire good people to do the work.
Well, maybe there's one more thing we can check. Do you have any female co-owners?
No, just me.
Ooh, have you ever identified as a woman? Or even just non-binary? It could really help your score.
What?
Your loan is denied. Come back when you fix your ESG score.
To me, that is the best definition you will ever see on environment social governance, because that's what it's about. They don't care about our energy. They don't care about economic growth. They don't care about America. They don't care about prosperity. They care about their agenda being fulfilled, and this is actually happening every day. They don't need the Green New Deal to pass Congress. It's been introduced twice. Never scheduled for a vote, never had a hearing, never a committee meeting, never a town hall, never had those switchboards lighting up. They don't need no stinking vote because the Green New Deal is being implemented through government corporate collusion, ESG, through our banking system. The Biden administration has announced every cabinet agency is a climate agency. That is how they're achieving it. So we no longer need a vote. It's real, it's happening, and it's not spectacular. So I wanted to go through some of the COVID climate now. This is all I really need to know about climate. I learned during the climate debate. This was a 1985 book basically saying you learned all of life's lessons in in kindergarten, and you could apply those as you got older. Well, the same thing happened in COVID. Nothing I saw in COVID had not occurred during the climate debate. So let's go. In the climate debate, I learned activists want you to panic. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic, Greta Thunberg. Why? Because if you panic, you make bad decisions. In the COVID debate, activists wanted you to panic. Neil Ferguson, a virus modeler, sounds the alarm. We're going to have Spanish flu excess deaths unless we turn full Chinese authoritarianism. Don't worry, we did turn full Chinese authoritarianism. Bill Gates warns of epidemic could kill over 30 million people. In the COVID debate, billionaires bought the media. Checkbook journalism, NPR got money from Zuckerberg and Rockefeller for their climate desk. So whenever you read NPR climate coverage, you're reading paid press releases from Zuckerberg and the Rockefeller Foundation. AP, that's NPR. AP also got money from another foundation of $8 million, same thing, biggest hiring spree. You're reading checkbook journalism. That's all this is. In the COVID debate, billionaires bought the media. Bill Gates pumps tens of millions of dollars annually to pay for positive media. Whenever you see him on an interview, it's an odd interview. If he goes to Australia, he might get one or two hostile questions that are even determined. Every other interview is a complete cream puff interview because he's literally, the reporters asking him questions are on his payroll. It's a great grift if you can get it. In the climate debate, the UN and governments were the single source of truth, and the UN declared this last fall, we own the science and the world should know it. So they partnered with Google to ensure only UN climate results appear. Have you ever wondered when you do a Google search why everything comes back? Whoa, where is this? It's all alarming. Corporate, I guess you can't say government, but corporate non-government entity collusion in this case, or international organization. So in the climate debate, UN governments were the single source of truth. In the COVID debate, the World Health Organization and governments were the single source of truth. This is Jacinda Ardern, former New Zealand Prime Minister. Take all non-government information with a grain of salt. Dismiss anything else. Government advice, we will continue to be your single source of truth. So you got that? The government is your single source of truth. Of course, Fauci said, I represent the science. Now, when this is the point we've reached, if you disagree with anything the United States government or any government in the world says, you are by de facto, by definition, a misinformer, and you can be canceled, deplatformed, defunded, and made to disappear as a voice. This was not America. This is, what John Kennedy, when he did the 25th anniversary of Voice of America, said a nation that doesn't trust its people to distinguish between truth and falsehood is a nation that doesn't no longer trust its population. And we've reached that point. In the climate debate, Big Al Gore and Google track your every move. Big Al is watching you. Al Gore's solution is to track and trace surveillance, tens of thousands of satellites with Google to monitor farms, industry, plants, and to keep track. Once they have all the data, then they start regulating you down. It's called climate trace. In the COVID, big government tracked your every move. The CDC tracked millions of phones to see if Americans followed the COVID lockdown orders. And of course, you had all the digital apps developed in Europe to monitor compliance with the lockdowns and vaccines. Climate envoy John Kerry is correct. The parallels between COVID and climate are screaming at us. You could easily replace the words climate change with COVID-19. And he's actually right. So this is one time we can all agree with John Kerry, because that's what it is. And it's 2 words, 1 plan. That's Professor Stephen Hamburg did a little chart there: extinction of the global virus, reduction of global temperatures. You had COVID zero, and then you have net zero. I mean, there's so many different things you could go through on this. The climate lockdowns, I'm not going to spend too much time specifically on all the medical journals and the merging, because I've done that before. But just to remind you that Richard Lynn's in 2009. This is 2009. It's hard to imagine a better leverage point in society than carbon dioxide to assume control. It's essential to breathing. If you demonize carbon dioxide and gain control over it, you, so to speak, control everything. It has, of course, a fundamental attractive to the bureaucratic mentality. Well, they imagined something that was much worse than fear of climate, and that's fear of being a grandma killer. Fear that your kids would kill you and have to apologize on your deathbed. The UN said the quiet part out loud in June of 2020. Even if the lockdowns were to continue for a decade, the change would not be sufficient. So we know the UN is basically saying lockdowns don't work. However, they've been calling for this. If you go back to 2013, this is Ivo de Boer, the only way a Paris Agreement at the time could achieve the 2-degree temperature goal is to shut down the whole global economy. So it's almost like he predicted it, right? This I found, this was during my research, November 2019. The UN demanded 7% yearly cuts in carbon dioxide 6 months before the COVID lockdowns began. November 2019, we need to cut CO2 7%. Fast forward a year later, the UN got exactly what it wanted. Look at that. Carbon dioxide fell 7% in 2020. Whoa! It's almost as if they, I don't know, could just be luck, coincidence. I'm not saying anything. Once they got the lockdowns, 2021 came around, what happened? Global lockdowns every 2 years are needed to meet the Paris climate goals. There you go. This is where so this is their new policy. That's why they love lockdowns. It hits so many. This is why Jane Fonda said COVID was God's gift to the left, because it gave them everything they ever wanted. Could COVID lockdowns have helped save the planet? And you heard so many articles about how the animals were returning, the air was cleaner, the weeds were growing up through the concrete as cities lay dormant for weeks and months on end. And then you have NBC News this week, you have the BBC, you have everyone saying, anyone who says climate lockdowns, they're a conspiracy theorist. The NBC News just did an article about how this is a conspiracy theory. A George Soros, Bill Gates funded scientist, Mariana Mazzucato of University College of London, coined the frickin' phrase climate lockdown. And she did it in one of their publications that was blessed by academia and our establishment. The world may need to resort to lockdowns again, this time to tackle a climate emergency. And this is her words, under a climate lockdown. Whoa, I don't get it. I thought that was a conspiracy theory. Listen to what she says. Governments would limit private vehicle use, cast-cowered car bans, ban consumption of red meat. We're already seeing that. John Kerry's already targeting that. Methane restrictions, our EPA. Impose extreme energy-saving measures. We're seeing that everywhere with net zero. Well, fossil fuel companies would have to stop drilling. Hey, ever hear of ESG? You can't get a loan unless you identify it as the opposite gender. To avoid such a scenario, we must overhaul our economic structures and do capitalism differently. She laid it out. She used the phrase climate lockdown. This is back in 2020, but now it's a conspiracy theory. Schumer is urging Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency. Biden almost declared it. The abuse of emergency power, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit at the end, this is where COVID can be repeated again and again and again. We've done nothing to stop it from happening again, the COVID lockdowns. Abuse of emergency power marked a descent from the Republic to empire in Rome, the centralization of power in Middle Ages, the entrenchment of oppressive regimes in Chile and apartheid in South Africa, the entire Third Reich occurred during a state of emergency that lasted 12 years. This is a BBC historian. So if Joe Biden, which there's now rumors again, I just got, I think, from Chris Horner, who's doing a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests, given that Biden's a lame duck with Republicans, this might be back on the table. If Joe Biden declares a national climate emergency in the United States, 130 new executive powers, not just the president, mayors, governors, you're back. You could have Gavin Newsom in California declaring, odd even car days or gas station closures because of emissions, because the drought in California's gone on, or there's a wildfire. We need to shut gas stations. All right. Gavin Newsom did not like that one. All right, here we go. I think I got it. Okay. So that's coming. Now, this is International Energy Agency, and someone was just talking to me about who run this. It's now been hostile takeover by the World Economic Forum, I understand, but this used to be a legitimate organization that monitored energy use around the world and gave good statistics. But they're now urging behavioral changes to fight climate. And look again, a shift away from private car use, upper speed limits, thermostat controls, limits on hot water. Keep in mind, this is important. I'm not quoting a Greenpeace blogger. I'm not quoting the Sierra Club. This is every mainstream organ of our society. Medical journals, academia, international energy, the United Nations, the World Health Organization. I'll be getting to Harvard University, our corporate media, governors and presidents and prime ministers. The Great Travel Reset. This is in the Oxford Mail. Traffic filters, otherwise known as 15-minute cities, is now being implemented to different parts of Europe. Now, this is misinformation. Here's a tip for you. When you hear something, when you see a fact check, and I did this in my book, I did it when it came to all the pandemic planning sessions, read the fact checks because there's a lot of good information. What they usually do is they get an extreme, like some user on Twitter who makes an outlandish claim, and then they spend the first 80% saying that's not true at all, and this was wrong, and this was wrong, and this is spreading on Facebook, or this meme is wrong. And then the last couple paragraphs are like, yeah, but they do allow the cars, and you will get fined, and it is going to start off, and then there's going to be a barricade. They admit everything, but it's buried in the thing, and the headline would never tell you, the first 6 paragraphs would never tell you. That's how they do it. So when I do these things, I actually go through those fact checks by the corporate media, and you can usually get the truth when you do it. But these 15-minute cities are going to cut car use, place strict rules on car journeys. They're going to monitor you. Some places you get 95 journeys outside of your area. Otherwise, you got to go an extra long route. You're going to be paying fines. And of course, they reserve the right to change it in the future. They had some language like that, which just meant you might be locked down. I believe they had, wasn't it something in, I think it was an East City and a West City divided. I don't really remember the name of it. But anyway, it was a while ago. I think, anyway, something big happened there in 1989. But this is what they're basically setting up, is that type of situation. Airline climate restrictions. So I'd like to say that climate lockdown is not a theoretical thing that may happen. It's already frickin' happening. May of this year, France has now banned short-haul flights to cut carbon emissions and save the planet. 2.5 hours or less. Now, there's a proposal now EU-wide to ban 6-hour flights in France. Couple things. This is going to force people to drive and increase the death rate because cars have a higher death rate than planes. It's going to force people into trains, and I don't know if the trains are designed to be able to handle it. I know European trains are great, but compared to American, but this flight ban is scary because on top of that, you have a net zero report in the UK that's talking about airport closures. And then look at the right there. That's the Bloomberg News, corporate media. No more cheap flights is a new reality for airline travel. Airlines face an expensive and challenging decades ahead as climate compliance laws get stricter. Do you see what's happening? Bill Gates, during the lockdowns, is urging longer COVID lockdowns. He bids on the world's largest private jet transport company. By the way, surprise, surprise, the France ban does not include private jets. This is commercial. This is for the masses, not for the World Economic Forum attendees. They don't have to worry about the short-haul flight. And this is just the beginning. Again, they're going for longer and longer. Their goal is to make it so that we're like 100 years ago where only the wealthy can afford the seaside vacation and everyone else is lucky to get their weekend fishing trip twice a year or once a year. BBC 2023, again, this is mainstream sources. Can living ultra-low carbon lifestyles be achieved by personal choice alone? Suggesting that we no longer have a say in this. Many of us need to cut our carbon footprints, and should it be choice? They're basically laying the foundation saying this is coercion, and we already know BlackRock has said they have to coerce companies. BBC, what would a flying free world look like? Are you ready for this? Fresh fruits and veggies would disappear from the supermarket in winter. Hey, let's go back a century when you couldn't get strawberries except when they were in season. Why not? I mean, we're saving the planet. Why not? Huge adjustments in supply chain, and this is the chilling line. It's about when, not if. Almost every major net zero report includes airport closures and, as Bloomberg News said, climate compliance rules. So there'll still be airports with planes, but the prices could be triple what they are, and people aren't going to be able to afford to fly. The whole idea is to get us, remember, you will go nowhere and be happy. That's basically, there it is. So it's also about gas-powered cars. Before we get into the gas-powered versus electric, they're going after car ownership. This is Business Insider. Electric vehicles won't save us. We need to get rid of cars completely. That's one. And then look at number two. Boris Johnson's transportation secretary, owning a car is outdated 20th century thinking. We must move to shared mobility to cut carbon emissions. This was also done by Andrew Yang, who ran for president, called for getting rid of private car ownership in a shared app. You would just call up an app if you had to go to the grocery store. Other things in Canada have called for pickup truck ownership, saying people should go rent a truck because you can't own SUVs and trucks. They're too gas guzzling. Ban gas cars. Okay, the World Bank, Nicholas Stern, former head, is now floating the idea that automakers aren't going to be able to get financing to make gas-powered cars. So here you have banking collusion, not really with automakers, because the automakers, this is being imposed on them. He floats the end of conventional vehicle sales. So you have the World Bank on board, ending it with that. Then you have California. This is the key. Bypassing democracy. This was an executive order by Gavin Newsom, who then had the California Air Resources Board, another unelected bureaucracy, issue the end line, I think it's 2035 for gas-powered cars. He does this, and then a few days later, told owners they couldn't charge their electric vehicles. And of course, that's the Babylon Bee headline. State with no electricity orders everyone to drive cars that run on electricity. And that's not silly if you think about it. They don't want you in cars. The whole idea of banning gas-powered cars and creating intentional car shortages is to force people into mass transit, where you better be masked up and vaxxed up, because they want to get cars off the road. All the cities are closing down many huge sectors of the streets. Their whole idea of mobility is what they need to get after. Now, this is borrowing. On the left is Cuba, and on the right is the East Germany with their crappy Trabant. We're now going to be in a situation where used cars are going to be disproportionately more valuable and sought after gas-powered cars. And we're going to end up in a situation like East Germany where the government is saying there's only one government-approved car. In the case of East Germany, the crappy Trabant. In the case of the modern, once free Western world, the electric car. Whenever you have the government saying you can only do this one thing, we got problems, and that's the kind of problems we're going to have. That's Cuba and East Germany. Now, if you think, okay, well, if the World Bank is stopping gas-powered cars, you got the unelected bureaucrats, and by the way, the Biden administration is now doubling down on what Gavin Newsom's doing. They're talking about federal restrictions. They're restricting emissions on cars so much to the point where cars aren't even going to be able to, you're not even going to have SUVs and trucks. They are doing it so aggressively. Luckily now, state attorney generals are fighting back. There's all sorts of lawsuits, but Australian corporate bank announces it will ban loans for gas cars in order to fight climate change. So, even if the automakers are still making it, now they're talking about corporate government collusion where you're not going to be able to get a car loan to get a gas-powered car. We're not finished. If you still, through all that, still have a gas-powered car, California, Colorado cities are now banning the creation of new gas stations. That's just for a start. Eventually, they'll probably close. Once they get that climate emergency declaration, they'll be able to close existing gas stations. But so if you're lucky enough to still have a gas-powered cars, you're facing shortages. And again, that's not like, oh, darn, there's shortages. That's like, we need to design this so people face shortages. We need to get them out of these private cars. We need to get them out of gas-powered cars. And of course, who's winning during all of this? Business Insider. Say goodbye to the U.S. car market as we know it. Cheap Chinese EVs are coming. If the battery is key to the EV future, China's got a lock on it. And China's EV surge threatens legacy automakers. It's the end of Western. There's no other way around it. Every scenario you look at, China's got the lock on the materials, the rare earth mining, the cheap labor, underage kids in Africa, slave labor, you name it. This is how they're going to achieve their vision, because this is only good. I mean, we're looking at 10, 20 years, the way you go in Walmart, everything's made in China. Every car dealership, every car will be made in China. They've already passed the US and South Korea with exports. China is literally becoming dominant. This is like the biggest mass suicide of the West you could ever imagine. You will own nothing, but someone else will own it all. And that includes your cars when they're talking about that. So let's talk about the great food reset now. Okay. Food production is being restricted to fight climate change. This is just, this is from May, last month, 2 months ago. John Kerry, slashing farm emissions critical to fighting climate change. We've seen this already happen in Sri Lanka, which collapsed and they overran the presidential palace. We saw it in the Netherlands, where they were trying to close down up to 12,000 family-run, generational-owned farms. With what? The same thing Bloomberg said about airplanes, climate compliance laws. Who can afford a climate compliance laws? Not the small family farmers that have owned it for generations. They were among the 12,000 being shut down. Who can afford it? Equity asset firms, Bill Gates, Chinese-run agricultural, they can absorb all the costs in the world. This is why ExxonMobil loved the UN Paris Agreement, why ExxonMobil loved Obamacare. They knew they could just gut all of their opposition because they can absorb any cost that comes. Plus, they have the best lobbyists and the most expensive lawyers you could ever imagine. So they're doing the same to America. It works so well in the Netherlands. By the way, the Netherlands fought back. They formed their own farmers' party. They're now fighting back. Australia, this went there, and Jennifer Moriarty, the scientist, said it's decimating Australian farming. It's now going to Canada, and John Kerry announced in May it's coming here. What exactly is it? It's an attack on high-yield agriculture, particularly nitrogen emissions, and also methane. So they're going after both high-yield agriculture production, crop yields, and they're also going after meat production, livestock. Irish government, on top of this, seeks to sacrifice 200,000 cows to reach their net zero climate goals. And of course, Kerry targets U.S. farmers next. Germany, their nutritional society, in collusion with the government, recommended 90+% meat consumption restrictions for German citizens, which, according to the daily newspaper, the mainstream daily newspaper, would be equivalent of 1 sausage per month per person. This is the proposal. I mean, this is how bonkers this has become. So, China is buying up American farms. This is Politico. Again, look at all my sources. Nothing I'm saying is some secret document. I can't reveal the source. No, Politico. The current trend in the U.S. is leading toward the creation of a Chinese-owned agricultural land monopoly. Oh my gosh, we can't let China buy American lands. Who can save us? Dun, 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 dun. A homegrown American has knocked out China. Bill Gates beat China. He is now America's largest farmland owner. And here's NBC News. Bill Gates is not the one in overalls. He's not the one on a tractor doing the farming. He's the landlord here. So in other words, Bill Gates isn't buying an old beat-up tractor from Mr. Haney to run a farm like on Green Acres. No, Bill Gates is turning farmers into renters as he gobbles up land. Why does Bill Gates want to buy all this farmland? Maybe it's just he claims, by the way, he does claim it's a coincidence that he has a group of investments and that he's like in a blind trust and they just buy up all this land and shazam, look at that, he's the number one single largest farmland owner. He's got an agenda. What's that agenda? This is MIT Technology Review. Again, not some secret recording or some obscure blog. Bill Gates, rich nations should shift entirely to synthetic beef. And he talks about essentially ending, he actually goes on and says that we should stop all actual animal agriculture consumption in the entire Western world. What does he offer instead? The Impossible Burger, the vegetable oil processed, and also Bill Gates and Richard Branson, 2 more billionaires, are betting lab-grown meat, the food of the future, investing billions of dollars into it, test tube steak, And then he goes on to say, eventually the green premium is modest enough you can sort out the behavior to use regulation or totally shift demand. So he's saying you either will shift and like it or will use regulation to make you like it. This is our future only if we allow it. Now, is lab-grown meat, just to give you an idea, well, first of all, it's 25 times worse for the climate. What's my source? The New Scientist, which is the progressive left-wing rag. Lab meat has now moved closer to American dinner plates. They just approved it now, certain forms of lab-grown chicken. Just so we understand each other, this is not vegetable oil. This is stem cells from a cow, calf, a pig, mixed with fetal blood, put into steel vat in petri dishes, festers for months. They add antibiotics, food coloring, texturing. There's no bones. This is all just sort of an amorphous blob of tissue. Now, it is meat because genetically it's derived from the stem cells of these animals. So I can't say you can't really call it fake. You could call it disgusting meat. You can call it frankenfood, but it is meat because it's derived from that. And then, are you ready for what comes next? They then get the meat ready for human consumption. How do they do that? You get a 3D printer, not making this up. This is the Israeli Times 3D printed steak. This is World Economic Forum. Machines print up to 6 kilograms of meat an hour. It's gonna that you can watch. I have these videos on my thing. They come out in like these processed sheets that makes the chicken nugget pink slime videos look yummy. But it comes out in these things, and they come out in your 3D printer at home. So hey, what's for dinner tonight, honey? Ooh, I'm printing you up a 3D lab-grown steak from Bill Gates. This is our reality, and this has happened. This just got approved by the US government for consumption. This is Greta Thunberg's key advisor, George Monbiot, UK environmentalist. At least he says what it is. Shutting down animal farming altogether. We need to do it because it's one of the greatest causes of climate breakdown. They don't use the word climate change, it's climate breakdown. So they're not shy about telling us what they're doing, just so you know. Nature magazine, premier scientific, eat less meat, UN report calls for change to human diet. Yahoo Finance, Americans may have to say goodbye to steak and burgers as beef costs rise. Why are beef costs rising? COVID lockdown, supply chain, and climate compliance. Remember that phrase. That's why the airplanes are going more expensive. That's why cars are going to be phased out. They're just going to make everything so expensive that the average person won't be able to afford it. They're doing it and they're succeeding. We're allowing them, and I'll say this right now. The Republican leadership on Capitol Hill sucks. Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, you can have them. Ask Kevin McCarthy today what he thinks about climate change. Climate's a serious problem, and we have solutions. We're going to plant trees and capture carbon. That's his climate change memo. I'll show you the video. That's who we have fighting against this. Now, we have good presidential candidates that get a lot of this, but I'm just talking about our leadership on Capitol Hill is pathetic. There's a lot of good senators and congressmen, but it's so sad. Okay, New York Times has praised inflation as a great way to adjust what we eat. This is the culture lifestyle journalist. Inflation has the potential to drive welcome change to the planet if Americans think differently. We could adjust what we eat to both save our pocketbooks and our planet. So great, food's more expensive. That's exactly what we wanted. Again, this isn't like, oh darn, we didn't see, this is an unintended consequence. No, this is the intended consequence of these climate compliance laws. I mentioned Sri Lanka. This is how the World Economic Forum promoted it, make the country rich. Of course, the country collapsed, complete collapse of government. He had to leave in exile, and that's how the World Economic Forum, which apparently doesn't follow AP standards when they update an article, they just took it down. Look, can't find the article anymore about how rich the country's going to be. New York Post, pizza is next. New York City cracking down on wood-fired pizza. Mayor, and by the way, you'll see the Media Matters and others, this is not a climate-related issue. This is about air pollution. No. Mayor Adams in New York talked about this being a carbon footprint issue, and they're going after these pizza ovens. Again, this is just like the Netherlands farms. 1915 coal-burning pizza ovens. Some of these are family-run, 100-year-old restaurants that are now facing what? Either extinction or $20,000+ in inspections, fines, retrofitting, scrubbers, all kinds of new techniques and devices, which ends one of the most authentic New York City pizza and the wood-fired pizza. This is what they're going after, And in New York City, it's just, they're pushing back very hard. They threw pizza over. The mayor's now forced to meet with some of the pizzeria owners. I did an article in New York Post, and we estimated based on a wood-burning stove, it would take 849 years to equal 1 year of John Kerry's private jet. That's assuming you ran that pizza oven 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which isn't even accurate. So it's well over 1,000 years. But they're not going after private jets or anything like that. My point is, this is what they go after. Same thing, you're going to end up with a bunch of Domino's and retail corporate chains taking over all these unique restaurants because these mom and pops don't have the money for these kind of regulations. But they don't care because they're trying to save the planet. Their goal is higher. They're saving a planet. They don't have time to hear about that. Not making this up. They're now coming for your ice cubes. This is Scientific American. This is 2 weeks ago, July 1 actually, but it came out a week before. Climate-friendly cocktail recipes go light on the ice. The protocol for properly made cocktails doesn't look sustainable. Bars use between 200 and 300 pounds of ice a night. Cocktails aren't unsustainable just because of the ice. They also rely on ingredients shipped from far away. This is my favorite. Jennifer Caillou, a sustainability-focused cocktail nerd, designed a bar menu that used as little ice as possible at her perennial restaurant in San Francisco that closed in 2019. Gee, why did it close? I don't understand. I thought this was all so popular. Do you see what they're doing here? This is the Sovietization of American society. Literally, the Sovietization. Every aspect from your ice cubes to your pizza to your gas stoves to your thermostat are going to be regulated, fined, climate compliance, nationalized. And we saw what they wanted to do in the 30s. It's happening now. There's calls to nationalize our energy, food already. They collapse the current system and they force us to comply. Coming for your clothes. I wish I were making this up. I'm not. They're called consumption interventions. This is the 40 mayors. Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, reduced the number of clothing, 3 new clothing items per person per year by 2030. Now that's under the aggressive scenario. You're allowed up to 6 items of clothing by 2030 under the more, freewheeling one. This isn't just some crank group. Affiliated with the World Economic Forum, Michael Bloomberg was the chairman of the C40 group, funded by George Soros, Google, FedEx, and IKEA. This is in the report. I got the screenshots. Consumption intervention, reduce number of new clothing item bought every year, reduce supply chain waste, reducing the number of new clothes alone 37%. And actually, I don't have the actual screenshot that says the 3 clothes, but it actually has it. I apologize for that. They actually lay it out with charts, graphs. It's incredible. This is what they're doing. You think cargo ships? Modern ships now are reverting back to the age of sailing. Cargo ships are using sails to help it meet carbon reduction goals. They're looking at modern shipping and retrofitting sails. That's a CNN article with a giant kite. Looks like they're windsurfing, pulling cargo ships out. Not to even save fuel, just to meet the climate compliance regulations. Medical care. This is important. Medical care in the climate crosshairs. More earth-friendly drugs, decarbonize the U.S. You better be terrified by this. Decarbonize U.S. healthcare. That means you're focused more on climate than you are patient care. This is actually, again, not Greenpeace, not a blog, not secret documents, not some conspiracy. Politico magazine. Hospitals are turning into climate change fighting machines. Are you ready for this? A UCLA plastic surgeon has now suggested timers for operating room sinks. Everyone still scrubs of course, but without wasting water. So do you want to go have a major invasive life surgery hearing, hey, what's that noise? Oh, that's the timer. He's done washing his hands. He couldn't go any longer. Well, we think it's enough time, but we're trying to save the planet. That's literally what they're talking about now. It gets worse. This is the Institute for Healthcare Policy Innovation. Operating rooms are the climate change contributor no one's talking about. So next time you go face a major life surgery, ask your doctor about the carbon footprint, because believe me, it's been considered. Ask if he cares about the carbon footprint. If he does, get the hell out of that office as fast as you can. Be like one of those cartoons. The door will be swinging. Okay. I know James Enstrom talked about American Cancer Society becoming an advocacy group. Well, I got some more evidence. 2020 study, American Cancer Journal. Climate change is already increasing cancer risk. This study in May of 2020 fretted over the carbon footprint of cancer care. This is the American Cancer Society spending time taking their eye off the ball of working on getting cancer care, the best possible care to cancer patients. What could possibly go wrong? May of 2020, let's fast forward to June of 2023. Distracted by climate change, cancer care critically affected by USA drug shortages. This has come on, again, when all the organs of our healthcare system are focused on carbon footprints and timers, and I'll get to some more insane stuff, what happens? They lose their eye. It's kind of the way Texas got too focused on solar and wind and didn't make a reliable grid when they had the big freeze blackout. Well, how are we going to get out of this cancer drug shortage? What can we possibly do? Whoa, just like electric cars and automobile industry, China's here to rescue us. China, FDA is now allowing for the first time import of cancer drugs from China amid this shortage. So we've got our cancer society focused on carbon footprints. We come up with a drug supply shortage and we rely on China. It sounds like every other issue that we've been talking about. Your doctor will treat the climate first and you will be happy. American Society of Anesthesiologists, not making this up, January 2023. Reducing anesthetics during surgery decreases greenhouse gases without affecting patient care. Now, there might be other reasons to reduce anesthetic, but it shouldn't have anything to do with greenhouse gases. And that's from the movie Platoon, the Oliver Stone 1987 movie. Take the pain! That's when he's dying on the battlefield and he's screaming and the guy says you have to take the pain. That's basically what you're doing. You're taking the pain to save the planet. Never let a crisis go to waste whether you're talking about, this is the USAID chief under Biden, catastrophic food fertilizer shortages, which are our opportunity to hasten transitions. And she actually said, never let a crisis go to waste. Climate policy caused the food shortages, not climate change. James gave a great talk on all the crop yields and everything else. There is no food shortage except those caused by climate policies, and they are coming. They are here. Al Gore, of course, warming of the food crisis. No, it's a climate policy food shortage. Media has this solution. This is Wall Street Journal. To save money on food, skip breakfast. I mean, they're so helpful with this. These are consumer reporters. They're actually thinking, this is it. All you got to do is skip breakfast. Okay. Good grub. Why we might be eating insects. So they've already got us softened up and approving lab-grown meat, and they're now approved insects. Now approved in the US, now approved in the EU. Italy pushing back, saying we're not going to have pasta made with cricket powder or mealworms. Giorgia Meloni, the Trump of Italy, is fighting back, and they're not allowing it. But this is World Economic Forum. Now, who cares? Who cares what they say? Well, look. This is New York Post. I feed my daughter crickets for protein. It saves hundreds on grocery bills. This was a professor in New York wrote this great article about how she's giving her little girl crickets. Europeans are now allowed to eat cricket powder. Italy bans insect flour. There you go. Italy proposes a ban on lab-grown meat, too, to protect its food heritage. So you can fight back against this. CNN, drink up. Cockroach milk is the protein drink you didn't know you've been missing. This is real articles. These are not spoof headlines. The Independent, could beer made from urine help water shortages? Hey, do you want to save the planet or not? How committed are you? You are the pollution they want to eliminate. This was in Scientific American. Human pee is a pollutant in the U.S. and can contribute to warming. Eating too much protein makes pee a problem pollutant. So now your breath they want to regulate as asbestos. Your pee, they're saying, is a problem pollutant. You can't eat pizza. You can't buy more than 3 new clothes a year per person, but you still have 7 years in which you buy more clothes, of course. That's not till 2030. Okay, yeah. Harvard School of Public Health links COVID and climate. The root cause of climate change also increases the risk of pandemics. We need to take climate action to prevent the next pandemic. You don't support the Green New Deal? You're a grandma killer. It's that simple. They've merged them together. Fauci, December 22 of this year, merge COVID and climate. Infectious diseases are, quote, largely the result of human encroachment on nature and often aided by climate changes. The New England frickin' Journal of Medicine, all in on this. Climate and COVID merge. Washington Post, climate change is increasingly viewed as a public health crisis. Mask up. COVID and climate merge. Partnership for preventing pandemics fueled by climate change. Gee, who's partnering? The Rockefeller Foundation and the World Health Organization. Wow, what a great, that's a marriage made in tyranny. You can be charged with committing climate homicide. Now, again, I just want to point this out. Not obscure blog, not secret documents, not anonymous sources. The Harvard Environmental Law Review this spring, climate homicide paper prosecuting big oil for climate death. Big oil will be sued for disaster death. So you can be charged with committing climate homicide now officially, according to the Harvard Environmental Law Review. As you recall, you can also be diagnosed as suffering from climate change. The doctor, the first one in the world, diagnosed a patient with heat stroke as clinically suffering from climate change. You can die from climate change. Australian academics in a peer-reviewed journal, climate change is the killer. We need to acknowledge it on death certificates as a pre-existing condition. So you add climate change as a cause of death. So just so we understand that, you can be charged with committing climate homicide, you can be diagnosed with suffering from climate change, and you can have climate change listed on your death certificate. This is the world we live in 2023. Of course, the reality destroys that. Meteorologist Anthony Watts, who works with James Taylor at the Heartland Institute, and what's up with that, 99% drop in climate-related deaths since 1920. So the entire thing is just complete off-the-base insanity. World Health Organization, climate is the greatest challenge of the 21st century and threatens all aspects of society. That was in 2018, pre-COVID, so they're already on this. This is what's new. The World Health Organization imposing global instant lockdowns. Biden administration is pushing this treaty, the pandemic treaty. This is the Washington Post. What word just sticks out to you in that headline? Countries maul a radical pandemic treaty. According to the Washington Post, who actually called it radical. But Joe Biden wants it. Now, Australia had a model where they had police track and trace apps. If you were at a grocery store and you got dinged because someone later tested positive, you had to isolate at home, or if you refused to do that, they'd take you to a forced quarantine camp. Bill Gates loved it so much, he said on multiple occasions this: if every country does what Australia did, the world could prevent the next pandemic. So the more tyranny you can do, the more prevention. Just like climate, the more tyranny you impose, the better the climate. It's the same thing. Man of great influence, Bill Gates. Why do we care what he says? He is the #1 funder of public health. That's the U.S. government, #1, Bill Gates, #2. But if you add it with his other organization, Gavi Alliance, and you look at other years, he's probably the #1 funder, exceeding the United States. So whatever the World Health Organization does, it does at the bidding of Bill Gates. The WHO could impose lockdowns under this pandemic treaty. This was something that, again, this is still, I think we have 6 more months on this. Biden administration is pushing hard. Member states will be obliged to follow instructions, including vaccine passports, border closures, quarantine, under a draft update. The plan would require member countries, which the U.S. will be a member, to recognize WHO as the guidance and coordinating authority and undertake WHO's recommendations in international public health response. You want to be concerned about something, you want to be fighting something, you want to be alerting your federal officials, this is what you want to be alerting them about. So, in conclusion, this is how wacky. Nuclear war is now considered good. On top of everything else, nuclear war could be a problem. But according to Huffington Post, a small nuclear war could possibly reverse global warming. So get those little fallout shelters, get them now, because once you go underground in them, I think it's 20 feet, when you come out, we'll have a world without global warming if this goes well. We'll see. And who knows? The way it's going in Ukraine, we might get a chance to try this out. All right. Cheap shot there. Okay. You are the carbon they want to eliminate. This is New York Times profiling. This is earlier this year. Earth now has 8 billion humans. This man wishes there were none. At least they're saying the quiet part out loud. Don't you? Yeah, let's give them applause. Next up, your kids is having a baby, pure environmental vandalism. I'm sure many of you have engaged in that sort of environmental vandalism. If you do have kids, only short ones are allowed. This is New York Times, not making this up. There's never been a better time to be short. Mate with short people for a greener planet by shrinking the needs of subsequent generations. Hey, this is science. Don't argue with the science. If you're speechless, well, that's because climate change is causing language loss. Not finished. Don't turn a blind eye to climate. Article this week, just added this morning. Scientists say climate change is making us blind. University of Toronto looked at 1.7 million adults over 65. Those in warmer areas, 44% more likely to have vision problems. Now, how many scientists in the room are you willing to sign off on this study? Do you believe that? Anyone? Freedom is fleeting. This is Milton Friedman, 1999. Free societies, the kind we've been lucky enough to experience over the last 150 years, are a rare exception in human history. Most people, most of history, have lived in tyranny and misery. Good news, though, is we're fighting back the school's rebellion led by parents willing to be called domestic terrorists. literally toppled the Democrat Party machine in Virginia. It led to the lifting of vax mandates all over, and vaccine and mask mandates all over every major liberal city, San Francisco, Washington, Baltimore, New York, Philadelphia, and everything in between, Chicago. RFK, I'll spend a moment here. This is the ultimate red pill. In 2014, that's my interview on the streets in New York City with RFK Jr. He said, I think, he's talking about the Koch brothers. I think it's treason. Do I think the Koch brothers are treasonous? Do I think they should be in jail? I think they should be enjoying 3 hots in a cot at The Hague with all the other war criminals. I wish there was a law you could punish politicians with, is what he's talking about there. I don't think there's a law you can punish those politicians under. May of this year, I get a call. I reached out on Twitter, and then they called me on a Sunday night. The RFK Jr. campaign, their chief communications spokesman, said, Mr. Morano, you've caused us a lot of problems with that interview. We would like to request the original, uncut, unedited interview. So I obliged. I gave them the interview, and then I posted it online. It's like a 5-minute interview, and our movie, I think we only used about 45 seconds. And RFK is now being asked about this interview in every interview that he does. He's getting hit left and right. And here's how he's dealing with it. And here's how he's dealing with the whole climate issue. He can't have the views he has on free speech and against COVID authority and still say climate, we need to have a UN Paris Agreement, a Green New Deal. He has now declared climate change is being exploited by the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates in the same way that COVID was exploited. Climate is being used for top-down totalitarian controls on society. People now see as just another crisis is being used to strip mine the wealth of the poor to enrich billionaires. I mean, I say give him a hand of applause. Regardless of how, I think he's sincere, but that is a huge red pill moment. This is what message going out to the Democratic base saying the climate agenda has been hijacked. That is a huge advance for climate skepticism. We're not finished. RFK went on to say, in my campaign, I'm not going to be talking about climate. I'm not going to argue with you if you don't believe in climate. We're not going to get a consensus. I believe climate is an existential threat. So he still apparently believes that. But I don't insist other people believe it. It's hard to persuade people that lines on a graph that say sometime in the future you're going to suffer, take my word, and I want you to give up these things in your life. All it's going to do is polarize people more. Wow, wow, and wow. That is a message from a Democrat presidential candidate. Bingo. He hit it right on the head. So this is the great, not reset, we have to start the great resist. Prescribe freedom, and I think this is where we have to have medical groups that are literally opposed to this tyranny going forward. As Jay Bhattacharya, Stanford epidemiologist, said, the biomedical security state that gave us the lockdowns, induced the panic, censorship, is still firmly in place. It is the standard pandemic response and will repeat the next pandemic unless we reject it. And we can't just reject it. Well, we can reject it by opposing it and by not complying, but we need laws to do that. And one of the things is emergency power declaration laws. We need to reform those. We can't have a government declare an emergency endlessly that goes on years and gives them unelected powers, bypass democracy. Better name for the WEF is the World Enslavement Forum, because that's really what we're talking about. It's a return to feudal serfdom. You'll own nothing, but you won't be happy, and you won't even have ice cubes, and you won't even have anesthesia. And this is how you should talk to your friends who believe in conspiracy theories. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm with Committee for Constructive tomorrow, and that's the book, The Great Reset. Thank you very much. Went longer than I thought.